4 days after Pearl Harbor, Adolf Hitler stood before the Reichstag and declared war on the United States. Britain was still undefeated. The Soviet Union had refused to collapse, and Germany had just added another industrial giant to the list of enemies it somehow needed to defeat. This was not the mistake that started Nazi Germany's defeat. It was the moment several earlier mistakes became almost impossible to undo. Because Germany did not lose the Second World War in one battle. It lost through a chain of decisions that kept expanding the war faster than Germany could finish the enemies it already had. The first fatal mistake began in 1940. France had fallen with astonishing speed. The Low Countries had been overrun. British forces had escaped from Dunkirk, but they had left much of their heavy equipment behind. From Berlin, the strategic map looked almost perfect. Only Britain remained in the west. But defeating France had created a dangerous illusion. Germany had destroyed a continental army in a land campaign. Britain was a maritime power protected by the Channel, the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force, an empire, and access to resources far beyond Europe. Hitler hoped Britain might negotiate. It did not. So Germany prepared for the possibility of invasion. Operation Sea Lion depended on something the Wehrmacht could not provide: air superiority. The Luftwaffe first attacked shipping, airfields, radar stations, aircraft factories, and fighter command. Britain's defense was stronger than it looked. Radar stations detected incoming raids. The Observer Corps tracked aircraft inland. The Doubting system connected information to command centers and then directed fighter squadrons where they were needed. Britain did not have to keep every fighter permanently in the air. It had to know where the enemy was going. German intelligence repeatedly misjudged how close fighter command was to collapse. Then the focus of the campaign shifted increasingly toward London and other cities. The Blitz inflicted terrible civilian losses, but bombing cities did not destroy the RAF quickly enough. And without control of the skies, crossing the Channel would expose the invasion fleet to British air attacks and the Royal Navy. Sea Lion was postponed. Britain stayed in the war. That mattered far beyond 1940. Britain remained a base for bombing Germany, a center for intelligence, a route for American support, and eventually the launch pad for the Allied return to Western Europe. Germany had defeated France in 6 weeks. Britain taught Hitler a more dangerous lesson. Defeating an army and defeating a country were not the same thing. Before we continue, my name is Noah. We built this channel for people who want the full story behind the decisions that change history, not just the simplified version everyone remembers. If that sounds like you, subscribe. It is free and it helps us make better videos more than you might think. All right, back to the war. By the summer of 1941, Germany had failed to eliminate one major enemy. Hitler's solution was to attack another one. The Soviet Union was not simply the next military target. For Nazi ideology, war in the East was central. Hitler wanted Lebensraum, or living space, the destruction of what the Nazis called Jewish Bolshevism, and a racial empire built through conquest, dispossession, starvation, enslavement, and mass murder. This was therefore not a normal campaign that became brutal by accident. It was planned as a war of annihilation, and German military leaders participated in preparing and carrying out that war. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. More than 3 million Axis troops crossed the Soviet frontier. At first, the results looked devastating. German armored formations punched through Soviet lines. Huge pockets of Red Army troops were surrounded. Hundreds of thousands were captured. The Wehrmacht advanced hundreds of kilometers. Here is the part that made Barbarossa fatal. The plan did not merely require Germany to win battles. It required the Soviet state to collapse quickly. German planning underestimated Soviet reserves, industrial capacity, political control, strategic depth, and the ability to raise new armies after catastrophic losses. It also underestimated distance. Every kilometer east stretched the supply system. Rail lines had to be converted to a different gauge. Trucks broke down. Horses died. Fuel had to travel farther. Roads became dust in summer and mud in autumn. The famous Russian winter made everything worse. But winter did not create the basic problem. Germany was already fighting a campaign whose logistics and assumptions depended on victory arriving before the war became long. The Soviet Union refused to cooperate with that timetable. Factories were dismantled and moved east. New armies appeared, The Red Army lost enormous numbers of men and still kept fighting. German troops reached the outskirts of Moscow. They did not destroy the Soviet state. By December, a Soviet counteroffensive pushed exhausted German forces back. The Blitzkrieg had failed to produce political collapse. Germany now faced exactly the kind of war its strategy had been designed to avoid. A long one. And then Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States declared war on Japan. It had not declared war on Germany. 4 days later, Hitler solved that problem for Roosevelt. On December 11, 1941, Germany declared war on the United States. The Tripartite Pact did not simply force Hitler to do this because Japan had attacked America. The agreement was framed around supporting a partner attacked by a power not already involved in the European or Sino-Japanese wars. Japan had initiated the attack on the United States. Hitler still chose war. This changed the shape of the war. For the first half of the conflict, Germany had repeatedly gambled that each enemy could be defeated before the next crisis arrived. Now Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States were all in the same war. That transformed the scale of the problem. America was not yet prepared to place millions of soldiers in Europe. Its immediate danger was potential. Factories, oil, shipyards of food, credit, aircraft, trucks, merchant shipping, and the ability to increase all of them year after year. Even before formal American entry into the European War, Lend-Lease had already allowed the United States to supply countries fighting the Axis. Now American industry could be mobilized directly for a global conflict. Germany had not merely gained another battlefield, it had gained another production system it would somehow have to outlast. Hitler hoped the United States would be distracted by Japan and expected war with America sooner or later anyway. But declaring it in December 1941 removed uncertainty at the worst possible moment. Germany was now fighting three major powers whose strengths complemented one another. Britain provided bases, naval power, intelligence, and global connections. The Soviet Union absorbed and destroyed enormous German ground forces. The United States increasingly supplied money, material, shipping, aircraft, and eventually armies. Germany was still dangerous. It could still win huge victories. But every defeat now became harder to replace. That brings us to mistake number 4. In 1942, Hitler tried to restore momentum in the East. The main strategic prize was not a city bearing Stalin's name. It was oil. Germany's war economy depended heavily on fuel, and the Caucasus contained critical Soviet oil fields. Operation Blue pushed German forces south, but the offensive divided its effort. One axis moved toward the Caucasus. Another moved toward Stalingrad on the Volga. The city mattered because it sat on a major transport route and protected the flank of the southern advance. Then symbolism began consuming strategy. Stalingrad became a battle for prestige. German forces fought street by street through factories, apartment blocks, rubble, and cellars. The Sixth Army under Friedrich Paulus drove much of the Soviet defense toward the Volga. It looked close to victory, but the Germans had created a long exposed front held partly by Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian forces with fewer anti-tank weapons and weaker reserves. The Soviets attacked those flanks. In November 1942, Operation Uranus broke through north and south of the city. The two Soviet spearheads met west of Stalingrad. The Sixth Army was trapped. And now Hitler made the decision that turned encirclement into catastrophe. He ordered the army to hold its position. The Luftwaffe promised to supply the pocket by air. It could not deliver anything close to what the trapped army required. An attempted relief force failed to reach the city. Paulus asked for freedom to break out. It never came. The original objective had been oil. Then Stalingrad became a battle for prestige. And once the Sixth Army was surrounded, prestige became a prison. In February 1943, the surviving German forces surrendered. Hundreds of thousands of Axis soldiers had been killed, wounded, captured, or lost across the wider campaign. Stalingrad was not one magical moment when the war instantly became unwinnable, but it destroyed the idea that Germany could simply keep solving strategic problems with another offensive. And by 1943, Germany's biggest problem was no longer finding one brilliant battlefield maneuver. The war had become a factory contest, a shipping contest, a fuel contest, a manpower contest, and Germany was fighting the combined resources of Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. And underneath the battlefield decisions was the fifth fatal mistake. Nazi Germany had entered a long industrial war without a realistic path to dominate the economic system fighting against it. This problem appeared everywhere. In the Atlantic, German U-boats had come frighteningly close to strangling British shipping. For Britain, imported food, fuel, weapons, and raw materials were essential. The U-boat campaign therefore offered Germany one of its best chances to break the Western coalition. But the Allies adapted. Convoy tactics improved. Escort groups became more effective. Radar and high-frequency direction finding helped locate submarines. Long-range aircraft closed parts of the air gap. Code breaking and intelligence improved routing. Escort carriers added aircraft where land-based coverage was difficult. In May 1943, U-boat losses rose so sharply that Admiral Karl Dönitz temporarily withdrew many submarines from the North Atlantic battle. Germany had not simply made mistakes, its enemies were learning, and they could often afford to learn faster because they could replace losses on a scale Germany increasingly could not match. The same imbalance appeared in the air. British and American bombers attacked German industry, transport, cities, and fuel production. The bombing campaign was enormously costly and did not make Germany collapse overnight. German production even increased in important categories for much of the war. But the Reich had to spend aircraft, guns, fuel, radar, workers, and trained personnel defending its own airspace. Resources used to protect German cities were resources unavailable at the front. Fuel became especially critical. A tank without fuel was not a tank. A fighter pilot without enough training fuel entered combat with fewer flying hours. A mechanized army without secure fuel supplies slowly lost the mobility that had made its early victories possible. Meanwhile, Soviet production continued. American production expanded. Allied merchant shipping expanded. Germany faced enemies that could lose aircraft, tanks, ships, and trucks, and still put more into the war. The imbalance became visible in June 1944. 4 years earlier, Britain had survived the Battle of Britain. Now the country Hitler had failed to knock out became the launchpad for the largest amphibious invasion in Western Europe. On D-Day, Allied forces crossed the Channel in the opposite direction. The irony was complete. Germany had once prepared to invade Britain. Now Britain was the base from which Britain, the United States, Canada, and other Allied forces invaded Nazi-occupied France. The German army remained capable of fierce resistance. The Normandy campaign became a brutal battle of attrition, but German forces were fighting under Allied air superiority while reinforcements and supplies poured across the Channel. Hitler again resisted withdrawals until the situation had deteriorated severely. The pattern from Stalingrad appeared in a different form. Hold ground, refuse flexibility, lose the ability to withdraw before defeat becomes destruction. By late 1944, Germany was being squeezed from east and west. The Red Army had destroyed Army Group Center and Operation Bagration. Allied armies had liberated France and entered Western Europe. German cities were under air attack. Fuel supplies were collapsing. The Luftwaffe could not recover its former strength. The final German offensive in the Ardennes achieved surprise, but not the strategic reversal Hitler needed. By 1945, the question was no longer whether Nazi Germany would win. It was how much destruction would occur before it surrendered. And this is why the 5 mistakes cannot really be separated. Mistake 1 left Britain in the war. Mistake 2 attacked the Soviet Union before Britain had been defeated. Mistake 3 added the United States before the Soviet Union had collapsed. Mistake 4 sacrificed a major army trying to recover the initiative at Stalingrad. And mistake 5 revealed the problem underneath all the others. Nazi Germany had built a military system capable of terrifying short campaigns. Its leaders transformed that into a long war against the largest industrial coalition on Earth. This does not mean Allied victory was automatic. Britain had to survive. The Soviet Union had to recover from catastrophic losses. American industry had to be converted into military power. Convoys had to cross the Atlantic. Soldiers had to fight from Stalingrad to Normandy. And millions of civilians, prisoners of war, forced laborers, Jews, Roma, disabled people, and others targeted by Nazi persecution and mass murder paid an enormous human cost. The Nazi regime's ideological goals were not merely strategic mistakes. They were crimes pursued deliberately. But strategically, those same ambitions ensured Germany kept expanding a war it could not finish quickly. The early victories made Nazi Germany look unstoppable. The five mistakes made sure it eventually had to fight everyone at once.